Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into political science, but like with a super high-tech twist.
Yeah.
We're talking about those large language models, those LLMs you keep hearing about.
Right.
They're changing the game in politics, like ChatGPT can write those poems.
Yeah.
Well, these LLMs are analyzing elections, policies, they're even simulating entire societies.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
What's really fascinating to me is how LLMs aren't just tools for political scientists anymore. They're like becoming the subjects of research themselves. We're seeing this fusion of computer science and political science, and it's raising all these questions about how AI is shaping how we understand politics,
Okay, so to guide us through this whole deep dive,
Okay.
we've got excerpts from this brand new paper. It's called 2412.06864v1.pdf.
Catchy title.
Right, but don't worry, we'll break it all down. And get this, some LLMs actually predicted the 2016 US election.
No way.
Yeah, so we'll dive into that. We'll explore how they can help us understand not just what happens in politics, but the why behind it all.
The paper has this really neat way of categorizing how LLMs are being used in political science these days.
Okay, I like categories.
Right. They break it down into what they call classic political science stuff, and then the tech side. So the first one, the classic stuff, that's all about how LLMs are tackling traditional political science tasks, but they're doing it in these totally new ways.
Right, let's unpack that a bit, that classic political science stuff.
Sure.
What exactly do they mean by that?
Well, think about the questions that political scientists always try to answer. Will this candidate win? Or what do people think about this new policy?
Yeah.
LLMs can analyze just mountains of data from election results way back in the day to what people are saying right now on Twitter.
Oh, wow.
And it helps answer these big questions,
So it's kind of like having a whole army of research assistants just crunching numbers super fast, right?
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about the number crunching, though.
Oh.
They can also generate realistic political content. Things like speeches, policy briefs, even simulate how different political groups would act in, say, negotiations.
That's pretty incredible. So they're not just predicting what might happen. They're helping us understand why things play out the way they do.
Exactly.
But you mentioned this tech side as well. What's happening over there?
So on the tech side, it's all about the researchers. They're building and fine-tuning these LLMs.
Okay.
Specifically for the work that political scientists do. This means figuring out which data sets to use, tailoring those models for very specific political tasks.
Got it.
And coming up with all these clever ways to get insights, even when, there's not a lot of data to work with.
It almost sounds like building these LLMs is just as complex as the political systems that they're analyzing.
You could definitely say that. But the really important thing here is that LLMs are evolving, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about making predictions anymore. They're being used to understand those underlying causes of why events in politics happen the way they do.
That's a big step. Yeah.
Huge step forward for political science.
I'm totally intrigued. Let's start with that whole prediction side of things. You mentioned LLMs predicting the 2016 US election. Didn't that cause a bit of an uproar?
It totally did.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, LLMs, they learn from the data they're given.
Right.
So if the data is biased or reflects existing inequalities, well, the LLM's predictions can end up being skewed. That's one of the big challenges that researchers are trying to tackle right now.
So even though some LLMs got the 2016 election right, it was more recognizing patterns in the data, not necessarily some kind of magical foresight, right?
Right, exactly. And the concern is that if the data itself is flawed, then the predictions could be flawed too.
That makes sense.
And it goes beyond just elections too.
Okay.
LLMs can look at data to predict public opinion on all sorts of issues, anticipate support for proposed policies, even forecast how successful different campaign strategies might be.
That's super powerful.
Right.
But it also shows how important it is to be critical about those predictions, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We can't just assume that whatever the LLM spits out is the absolute truth.
We can't.
Yeah.
We need to understand where that data came from,
Right.
how the model was trained, what limitations might exist. That's why that paper, it emphasizes transparency in this whole LLM research.
Yeah.
We need to be able to see behind the curtain how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Love that analogy. Transparency is key, especially in something like politics.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the predictions and all that, but let's move on to the why.
All right.
How are LLMs helping us understand those root causes of political events? I think that's where it gets really interesting.
That's where things get really interesting. That's where the idea of causal inference comes in.
Oh.
Imagine trying to figure out, say, if a campaign strategy actually led to a candidate winning, or if it was something else entirely.
Right.
LLMs can help us untangle these super complex relationships that exist in political systems. It's a whole web of stuff.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with a million pieces, right?
Yes.
And the LLM helps you put those pieces together so it actually makes sense.
That's exactly it. Political events rarely have a single cause. It's always multiple things.
Yeah.
A ton of interconnected factors. LLMs can actually trace those connections, help us understand the underlying dynamics.
So instead of just seeing what happened,
Right.
we can start to understand the how and the why.
The mechanisms driving those events. It's a huge leap forward in understanding how politics really works.
Absolutely. And that ties into explainability, right?
Yes.
It's not enough for an LLM to give us an answer.
Nope.
We need to know how it got there. Like, what data did it look at? What was the logic? What biases might have, snuck into its conclusion?
You got it.
Explainability is so important, especially when decisions based on this stuff can have, like, real consequences in the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to trust the insights these models are giving us. And that means we got to understand the reasoning behind them.
Makes sense.
The paper actually brings up a case study where researchers used LLMs to simulate voting behavior.
Okay.
And a big focus of theirs was making sure that those simulations were transparent and their predictions could be explained.
So they weren't just interested in whether the LLM could predict how people would vote.
Right.
They wanted to understand the why behind those predictions.
That's right.
That's really encouraging.
It is. And this is just the beginning. Researchers are using LLMs to analyze all kinds of political text.
Okay.
Like speeches, social media posts, you name it.
To understand how language shapes opinion.
Exactly. And how it influences those political outcomes.
They're digging into all those nuances.
Yeah.
The subtle ways that, like, words can be used to persuade or manipulate or even inspire.
It's pretty amazing what we can learn
It is.
about the power of language and how it's used in that political arena.
Okay, so we've been talking about how these LLMs can do things like predict elections, analyze all that political talk.
Yeah.
But I gotta ask, on the text side of things, how are researchers actually building and, adapting these LLMs specifically for political science?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. It's a whole area of research in and of itself.
Really?
One of the big hurdles is finding the right kind of data to train these models on.
I see.
Unlike some AI fields where you've got these massive data sets just ready to go, political science often deals with information that's like more nuanced and really context specific. It's tricky.
So it's not just as easy as like scraping a bunch of tweets or something and feeding it to the LLM?
Not quite. The quality of the data, that's what's super important. Think about like analyzing political speeches.
Okay.
You need data that captures not just the words, but also the speaker's tone, how the audience reacts, the whole political context.
Yeah.
And that kind of data. Not so easy to find.
That makes sense. It's like you're not just teaching an LLM the dictionary definition of a word, right?
Right.
You're teaching it all those little connotations, the cultural baggage that comes with it.
You got it. It's like all the stuff that's unsaid but still there, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And researchers are getting super creative. They're building new data sets by carefully collecting and labeling information from all kinds of sources, government documents, news articles, social media posts, even videos of political events.
Whoa, that sounds like a ton of work.
It's a massive undertaking, no doubt. But it's essential, right? We got to make sure the LLMs we use in political science are trained on data that's relevant, but also reliable. It's not just about quantity.
Right.
It's got to be the right kind of data.
So it's like laying the foundation for a house.
Yeah.
If the foundation's weak, the whole thing is going to be unstable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. So once you've got that solid data foundation,
Okay.
researchers use all these different techniques to fine-tune those LLMs for very specific political tasks.
Can you give me like an example of what that fine-tuning looks like?
Sure. Let's say you want to build an LLM that can predict public opinion on, I don't know, a new environmental policy.
Okay.
You might start with something like GPT-4, something that's already been trained on a ton of text and code, but then you need to fine-tune it on a data set specifically about that policy. Maybe it's a collection of news articles, social media posts, survey data, that kind of thing. This helps the LLM really learn the specific vocabulary, the arguments,
Right.
all those nuances associated with that particular area.
So it's like taking this general purpose language model and giving it a crash course in environmental politics.
Exactly. You nailed it. And there are a bunch of different approaches to fine-tuning. Some researchers use this thing called prompt engineering, where they craft the input prompts very, very carefully to guide the LLM towards the outcome they're looking for.
Right.
Others use parameter-efficient fine-tuning, which makes the whole training process more efficient, less computationally expensive.
Interesting. So there's a whole art and science to fine-tuning these things.
There really is. It's an area where there's a lot of active research going on, always new techniques being developed.
And it's not just about accuracy, though.
Right.
It's also about making them more transparent and explainable.
100%.
We keep coming back to that transparency thing.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about the practical side. Like, how do researchers actually make these LLMs more explainable?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
There are a couple of approaches being explored right now. One is focusing on what's called chain of thought prompting.
What's up?
So instead of just asking the LLM for an answer straight up, you guide it to think through the problem step by step, explaining its reasoning as it goes. This makes the whole decision-making process more visible. You can actually understand it.
So it's like asking the LLM to show its work, not just give the final answer.
You got it. And they can be really helpful for spotting any biases or flaws in how it's thinking.
Right, right.
Another approach is using visualization techniques.
Okay.
Basically to map out the connections between different concepts and ideas inside the LLM's own knowledge base.
So we can actually see how it's putting things together.
Yeah. How it's structuring information.
Yeah.
How it makes inferences.
Like creating a map of the LLM's brain.
Yeah. A map of its brain.
Showing how all these different ideas are linked and how those links lead to its conclusions.
That's a great way to think about it. And as these visualization techniques get more and more sophisticated, they're going to be really valuable tools for understanding how LLMs make sense of the world, especially the political world.
It's fascinating. We've talked about the data, the fine-tuning, explainability, all that. But the paper also had that case study where they looked at some of these technical challenges more concretely. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Absolutely. They looked at how researchers used LLMs to, get this, simulate voter behavior in the 2016 election. The big question was, how would different LLM configurations and fine-tuning techniques affect the accuracy of those predictions?
So they were putting different LLMs through their paces, seeing which ones could really capture how people vote.
Exactly. They used a data set called the American National Election Studies, ANES for short.
Okay.
It has a ton of information about individual voters, their demographics, political views, voting history, all that.
That's a goldmine.
It is. And it allowed them to compare what the LLM predicted to what actually happened in real life.
Cool. So what did they find? Did they discover, the secret recipe for the perfect election predicting LLM?
No secret recipe, unfortunately.
Oh.
But they did find that generally the larger, more complex LLMs, things like GPT-4 and Llama 3.170B, they tended to do better at predicting voting patterns than those smaller models.
Makes sense.
Probably not too surprising, since those bigger models have been trained on way more data.
Right.
And they've got those more sophisticated algorithms for processing all that information.
So size does matter when it comes to LLMs, at least in this case.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
But they also looked at how different fine-tuning techniques affected things.
Did they? What did they find there?
Oh, they experimented with all sorts of stuff, prompt engineering, different types of parameter-efficient fine-tuning, you name it. And what they found was that the fine-tuning technique you choose, that can make a big difference in the model's accuracy.
Really?
Especially when you're working with limited data.
So it's not just about having a powerful LLM. It's about training it the right way for the job you need it to do.
100%. That's like having a fancy sports car.
Yeah.
It's great to have all that horsepower, but you need a skilled driver who knows how to use it properly. I love the analogy. Now, we talked about the potential for LLMs to pick up biases from the data.
Right, right.
Did this case study shed any light on that?
Oh, it did. They found that even with a data set like ANES, which is supposed to be representative of, voters in the U.S.,
right,
the LLMs could still show some bias in their voting simulations. And the specific features they use to train the model, things like demographics, political affiliation, even media consumption habits.
Interesting.
Those could all influence how strong those biases were.
So even with a super carefully curated data set, there's still a risk of bias sneaking in.
There is. Which means we always have to be cautious, always developing techniques to mitigate those biases.
For sure.
The researchers in the study, they looked at methods like that chain of thought prompting, trying to encourage more balanced reasoning,
Right.
and adding in more political features to the data to help the model better understand all the complexities of voter behavior. It's a never-ending battle trying to keep these LLMs from reflecting all the messy stuff that exists in the real world, huh?
You could say that. It's a challenge for sure, but it's an important one.
Totally agree.
We want these LLMs to be used to create a more informed and equitable political landscape,
Yes,
not to just reinforce the inequalities that are already out there.
exactly. Now, I know we've been deep in the weeds on the technical stuff here,
We have.
but I want to hear your thoughts on the bigger picture. Like, what does all this research mean for political science moving forward?
That's the big one, isn't it?
It is.
I think, honestly, we're still just scratching the surface of what LLMs can do in political science. But what's clear is this.
Yeah.
These models, they're going to have a huge impact on how we study and do politics. They're already changing how we collect and analyze data, how we make predictions, how we understand what causes those big political events.
It's like we're entering this whole new era of political science.
It really is.
So where data, algorithms, AI, they're all becoming super important.
Yes. Front and center.
It's exciting, but also kind of intimidating, right?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
It is. There's so much potential here.
Yeah.
LLMs could help us solve those really tough political problems, help us make better decisions, create a more just and equitable society. But there are also risks, of course.
Of course, like with any technology.
We've got to be mindful of those and work together to make sure these LLMs are used responsibly and ethically.
Couldn't agree more. We've covered so much ground today, like how LLMs can predict election results, how researchers are fine-tuning them for those specific political tasks.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. It's super clear that these AI models could really revolutionize political science.
Totally.
But what about, like, the future? Where do you see all this research going?
That's where it gets really, really exciting. The paper points to some super promising avenues for future research.
Oh.
Like places where LLMs could totally change how we understand and engage with politics in some pretty profound ways.
I'm all ears.
One area that's particularly interesting is those simulations, like developing even more sophisticated and nuanced simulations.
We talked a bit about using LLMs to simulate voter behavior and policy debates.
Yeah.
But, like, take it a step further for me. What kind of simulations are we talking about here?
Imagine simulating whole political campaigns, like from start to finish,
Wow.
with, public opinion shifting, media coverage, all those evolving strategies,
Right.
even unexpected events that get thrown into the mix.
Oh, that's cool.
It'd be like having a virtual lab
Right.
for exploring how campaigns work, what factors lead to, winning or losing.
That's amazing. Like a political strategy game, but in real life.
Kinda, yeah.
What kind of insights could we get from something like that?
We could understand so much more about how voters react to different messages, how the media shapes public perception,
Right.
and how those campaign strategies have to adapt to things changing all the time.
It wouldn't just be about understanding what happened in the past. It'd be about using simulations to, like, see different possibilities play out.
Exactly.
And even maybe inform how future campaigns are run.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond elections, too. Imagine using LLMs to simulate, say, the whole legislative process.
Oh.
Seeing how different bills would get debated, amended, passed, or rejected. We could even simulate international relations.
No way.
Yeah, exploring how different countries might react to, global events.
My mind is blown. But it all comes back to that data, right?
It always does.
These simulations are only as good as the information they're based on.
100%. As those simulations get more and more complex,
Yeah.
we'll need even bigger, more diverse data sets to train them. That means building new ones from scratch, but also finding creative ways to use existing data sets from, other fields that might be related.
It's not just about building better models. It's
Right.
making sure they're built on a solid foundation.
The right data.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about those simulations.
We have.
But the paper also mentions some other exciting areas for future research. What else caught your eye?
One area that I'm really excited about is using LLMs for causal inference in political science.
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier.
I did.
But there's just so much more to explore. LLMs could help us, really untangle those complex cause and effect relationships that drive political events.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing what happened, it's understanding why it happened.
It feels like we've always struggled with that in politics, like pinning down what causes what.
Tricky.
There's so much going on, so many things to consider.
So many variables. But LLMs can help us make sense of all that chaos.
Okay, how?
LLMs can look at massive amounts of data, pick out patterns that we might completely miss. They can help us, control for those confounding variables and really zero in on the specific factors that contribute to a certain outcome. Imagine being able to trace like the exact chain of events that led to a policy being adopted or a conflict breaking out.
Wow.
That's the power of LLMs.
It'd be like having a magnifying glass for politics.
Yeah.
You can zoom in on all those details, see how everything fits together.
Exactly. And as these models get even better,
Yeah.
we might even be able to use them to explore like counterfactual scenarios.
Yeah.
What if this event hadn't happened? What if this policy had been different?
That'd be incredible, like rewinding history, exploring different possibilities, learning from past mistakes, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. And those insights could be super valuable for policymakers.
How so?
Help them make better decisions,
Yeah.
anticipate those unintended consequences.
It's like LLMs could bridge that gap between hindsight and foresight.
Totally.
Cool. So beyond simulations and causal inference,
Yeah.
any other areas where you think LLMs are going to make waves?
Oh, absolutely. Political communication is a big one. Imagine using LLMs to analyze political speeches, debates, all those social media posts,
Okay.
breaking down how language is being used to persuade, inform, even manipulate people.
Like an AI lie detector for politics.
Kinda. We're not quite there yet, but it's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah.
We could use LLMs to identify those common rhetorical techniques, analyze the emotions behind the language,
Right.
and even track how specific messages spread and change across different platforms.
It's like using LLMs to crack the code of political language.
Yeah.
Understanding those subtle ways that words shape how people see things, how they influence the political world.
That's the idea. And those insights,
Yeah.
we could use them to build tools for fact-checking, identifying misinformation, maybe even promoting more, civil and productive political discussions.
What if you had like an LLM-powered platform that could analyze political debates live?
Oh, wow.
Point out inconsistencies, flag misleading claims, give people context and background information so they can make better judgments.
That would be game-changing.
It would.
That's how LLMs can really empower people, help create a more informed and engaged public.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've talked about so much, from the technical side of LLMs to their potential to like completely reshape how we study and do politics.
Totally.
It's clear that these AI models are going to be super important in how we understand the political world moving forward.
Couldn't agree more. It's an exciting time to be in this field.
It is.
I can't wait to see how these technologies develop and what new discoveries we'll make because of them.
To everyone listening, check out the show notes for links to the paper and other resources if you want to learn more.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
And as always, keep thinking critically out there as we navigate this whole world of AI and politics.
It's a wild world.
It is.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.